Norwich University is the nation's oldest private military college, but until 1974, there were no women that were in the Corps of Cadets there. I love this. I knew I was a troublemaker when in the 5th grade, my teacher announced to the class that Little League tryouts were happening the following weekend. And I raised my hand and I said, when and where, because I want to try out. And all the guys in the class looked at me, some of them groaned. Some people thought I wasn't listening to the question. I didn't realize that women were not in Little League at that time, but I did try out. I did make the Little Leagues, and I was one of the first in town. So I think that's when I found out I was really a troublemaker. That's a personal thing that still goes on. Some people who are told no, maybe that energizes them, maybe it demoralizes them. I hope that we can get to a point where people are resilient enough and strong enough to want to just keep going on, even if they're told no. When I learn about the history of the women that graduate from Norwich University. So you found me because I'm a Norwich University graduate. And this year, 2024, is the 50th anniversary of the first women in the Corps of Cadets at Norwich. Norwich University is the nation's oldest private military college. But until 1974, there were no women that were in the Corps of Cadets there. There were a few women a couple of years before that. Once Title IX was enacted back in 1972, there were women that were allowed into classes with Norwich, but they weren't in the Corps of Cadets. So now that we're coming up to that 50th anniversary, I'm getting to know some of those women from the 70s and the struggles that they went through and what they accomplished. And I'm just amazed. But every day I come across one of those "are you kidding" type moments. For instance, it wasn't until 2 years after Norwich made women in the Corps when the other service academies allowed women into their Corps of Cadets. West Point actually asked some of the women from Norwich University to come to them to help them, assimilate women into their Corps. And then 25 years after Norwich let women into the Corps of Cadets is when one of the, I think it was VMI down in Virginia, finally let women into their Corps of Cadets. That's 25 years after that. Simple things these days that surprise me. For instance, I'll give you some more examples. These are seemingly easy, but being in the military, that still some areas they're not used to having a lot of women. There was one of the bases that I commanded at where they only had a women's shower in one of the buildings. And when I realized that, I went to the civil engineering and the facility managers to ask, how can we get a shower in these other buildings? And I actually had to go and design and say, hey, you can fit this here, and this is why we need more women's showers. Things like hair standards. It was the Chief of Staff of the Air Force just about 4 years ago who was approached by the husband of a young airwoman, who said, my wife approached her boss in the Air Force because when you tie your hair up and you have the barrette on the top of your head, it would give her a headache. And I do that. I have long hair, so I have the barrette, and it hurt. So her husband, who is also in the Air Force, went to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and mentioned that. And within 4 months, the Air Force regulation instructions were changed, and women are allowed to wear their hair down to below their shoulders, and alleviated so many of those headaches for women. And now the other services the Army adopted that, for instance, but that was a simple thing. Why put someone through those headaches for no reason? If it was a safety thing, I can understand that, or we could understand that, but it wasn't. It was just for grooming purposes. Nursing, young mothers in the military, there were no facilities for them to pump breast milk, right, and store it during the workday. When I discovered that on my base, I didn't even think of it. I was a young mother, and I had to do that in the military, and I just would lock up in the, in a closet or a bathroom stall somewhere. I didn't even think, we need to have a nursing room, until one of the young women that works for me, Brent, mentioned it to one of her bosses, and we were able to get that. I would love to hear more of what we are not thinking of for those women, because when you're in the moment, like myself, or when you're older, not experiencing anymore, and you kind of made do, There's no reason to make do. There were such easy changes that someone could have made. I just didn't think of it at the time. So please tell me the problems and we'll go fix them.
Was a troublemaker when I ran away and joined the Navy and didn't tell anybody I was leaving until like 4 or 5 days before. And my mom about had a heart attack because I didn't talk to a soul and tell a soul what I was planning. Nobody except my recruiter knew that that I had enlisted. So, and that started the whole journey. I was in college. I graduated from high school. I was in my freshman year at the University of Kentucky. And everybody I talked to, I ran into a friend or a coworker who had enlisted in the Marine Reserves. And it just sounded fascinating, and the travel and the things you could do. And I'd always wanted to learn to fly, but I didn't have the money. You know, to me, it was like this very expensive, oh my gosh, you have to have all this money and flight time. And I would watch the planes. We lived not too far from an airport. So it just was kind of a pipe dream, you know. And then I'm like, well, maybe I can just join the service. You know, I'll just go join the Navy. Maybe I want to go fly for the Navy. I can just let them pay for everything. And nobody knew how to tell me what to do. My counselors didn't understand it. Everybody in my high school stayed in Kentucky, went to UK or another school close to us. All the girls were teachers and nurses. So they didn't know how to answer me. They were just like, well, why do you want to do that? Why do you want to go away to school? We have a school here. Why do you want to go in the Navy? You know, they just didn't understand. So I just kind of started going to recruiters, and the Air Force recruiter literally patted me on the head and said, oh, here, you can be an administrative assistant. And here's this community college program. And I was like, I don't want that. I want to, you know, finish a 4-year college and commission and fly. And he goes, and I was scheduled to take the ASVAB already, which is the entry exam to enlist. This was not to be an officer, but to be enlisted. And he goes, well, you go take the ASVAB and you know, then call us when you're done. And so I actually took the ASVAB through the Navy. I went and took it through the Navy. Then I met this recruiter and I did really well. And then the Air Force started calling me to come to the Air Force. And I was like, well, I've already signed with the Navy now. Except when I signed with the Navy, when I was talking to her, she goes, well, you can enlist, but they had an officer training program that she brought to my attention. And so you had to do some interviews and applications, and it was called Broadened Opportunity for Officer Selection and Training, and you had to be enlisted to go to the program. So she's like, if you enlist and apply for the program and complete it, then you get a 4-year scholarship, you go back to college, you commission, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you got to get through all the wickets, you know. And I was like, sure, let's go. And it was funny because we went to pick a rating. So whatever the job is that you do in the Navy as enlisted is called a rate. And I was looking through the brochure of all the different jobs, and there was a aviation, there was an aviation air crew member. You fly in the back of the plane and you run all the equipment and stuff. And I go, well, I want to do that. She was like, oh, women can't do that. And then I was like, oh, there was an aviation, like electronics technician where you fix all the electronics, and oh no, women can't do that. And then there was a diver, and she's like, oh, don't tell me, women can't do that. So nothing I picked women could do. So I go, forget it, I'll just go in as a non-rate. Still, stories like now I hear of women, you know, they can't do certain things. People still say things like women can't do that. I'm just like, what are you in the whatever, I'm just gonna go, you know, I'm going, that's it, I'm going. And she was just always there and answered my questions and supported me. And she wasn't like, well, you know, maybe that won't work. Or, I mean, she was just very positive. And maybe that was her recruiting style. Maybe she just recruited really well. If it wasn't for her and her encouragement, I mean, if she hadn't, you know, looked for ways for me to do what I wanted to do, I wouldn't have known about that program. You know, I wouldn't have known how to enroll. I would have had no idea because we didn't have the internet. It wasn't like you could Google military schools or Google how to fly for the service or anything. So people just didn't have answers. And she went and found answers for me, which I just think is amazing. She just took that extra step, which all the people I mentioned, you know, before, Mr. Stewart and Colonel Donovan and people like I have a mentor now that they just take that extra step, you know, or they just sit and listen to you talk for a little bit, or they give you they give it to you straight up, right? You know, if you're doing something stupid, or maybe you shouldn't do that, you know, they're honest with you. And there are some really great people out there that love to help other people. And I'm just very thankful for that. And I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her and Mr. Stewart, and probably Ronald Donovan. I wouldn't be here right now. I'd probably be a teacher in Kentucky. I don't know, you know. So it could have been a completely different life. Still admirable, I guess, right? A teacher, but just a completely different life.
I was a troublemaker when I had a president of a company sitting in front of me that was giving me $50,000 or maybe $100,000 worth of business a year, and I said no. I am not going to continue this relationship anymore. And the look of shock it was a total look of shock. So taking the deep breath and recognizing that I was not being treated fairly, my employees or my associates were not being treated fairly, to say no was a big deal. And I'm really proud of that. And it changed the whole business model. I still do business with this company because I was able to express why and how and what we needed to have as a partnership. I consider business as a partnership. I don't want to be a customer, or I want to be a partner with you so that we can, if we have trouble, we can come up with it. But I would say that was, for me, that was being a real troublemaker, because he was not prepared for that.